What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Crimson Tide Today. I'm Zack Aitken, and I appreciate you joining me for another episode as we talk all things Alabama football. If you're enjoying the content, one of the best ways to support the channel is by hitting that like button, subscribing if you haven't already, and sharing this video with another Alabama fan. And make sure to leave a comment below. I always enjoy hearing your opinions and discussing the biggest stories surrounding the Crimson Tide. For more Alabama football coverage throughout the week, including recruiting news, team updates, and instant reactions, be sure to follow me on X and Instagram at ZAkin7. Let's go ahead and start the opening drive. So, we're starting to get a better idea of what Alabama's defense is going to be looking like in 2026, and after hearing Kane Womack talk about this group, there are a few things that really stand out to me. And maybe the biggest one is this. Alabama, they want to be a more physical defense this year. And that sounds very simple. Every defensive coordinator in America, they're going to want to tell you that they want to be physical. But for Womack, I think it goes beyond simply occupying a gap. He wants Alabama's defenders attacking blocks, getting off those blocks, and actually finishing plays. And Womack admitted that Alabama simply wasn't consistent enough in that area last season. That's important because if Alabama wants this defense to take that next step, I think it's going to have to start with stopping the run. And one player who can make a major difference there is the $1 million man, Devin Tompkins. I've already talked about Tompkins before because I think he could be one of the more important players on this entire defense. He gives Kane Womack something every defensive coordinator wants, and that's versatility. Tompkins, he can play that bandit position, but Alabama can move him inside and use him as a 3 technique as well. That gives Womack the ability to change fronts and create different looks without necessarily changing the personnel in the field. But what really has Womack excited is Tompkins' physicality. At his size, he's going to be a major matchup for tight ends on the edge. And if Alabama can consistently shut down that C gap and prevent running backs from cutting things back, that's going to make everyone else's job much easier. And that brings me to another player who's been continuing to generate some buzz, and that's Luke Metz. Metz, he's becoming one of the more interesting names to watch at this linebacker competition. Womack basically said Metz was thinking too much earlier in the spring. He was worried about the scheme and he was worried about making mistakes. And when linebackers start thinking instead of reacting, naturally they're going to play slower. So Womack, he challenged him to get back to what made him successful in the first place, running, hitting, and playing decisively. And apparently something clicked because Womack said Metz is now playing at a very high level. That can make this inside linebacker battle extremely interesting. And I think there's an even bigger point here. Womack said that this defensive line is playing more consistently within its gaps and allowing the linebackers to play faster and the safeties to come downhill more aggressively. That's exactly what this defense is supposed to work. When the guys up front are doing their jobs, everyone behind them is going to get better. And then when you still have Yonze Pierre coming off the edge as well. Womack, he acknowledged Alabama hasn't generated the pass rush that it's wanted over the past couple of seasons, but Pierre, he started changing that late last year. Now Womack says Pierre is playing with more confidence, and you can see it in the way that he moves and anticipates things coming off of the edge. If Pierre can take that another next step, Alabama could finally have that consistent edge presence that this defense, they've been missing for the last few years. And there's also one thing that Womack said that caught my attention as well. Expect Alabama to play more aggressive in the secondary. Womack, he talked about playing more press man and mixing in additional match coverages, particularly on third down. He even mentioned conversations with former head coach Nick Saban about some things that Alabama could add defensively after struggling to get off the field in some third and long situations last year. And then with the length and the athleticism that Alabama has at corner, I love that idea. You've got the personnel to challenge receivers at the line of scrimmage, you've got to use it. So when you put everything together, I think we're starting to see what Womack wants this defense to become. More physical up front, more aggressive at linebacker, and more pressure coming off of the edge. And more versatility on the back end as well. There's still plenty of fall camp remaining, but if Alabama can put all of those pieces together, this defense has a chance to be one of the biggest strengths of the Crimson Tide in 2026. Alabama's already putting together what become a really strong 2028 recruiting class, and there's another name Tide fans should be getting familiar with, and that's Aiden Woodruff. Woodruff, he's a 4-star defensive lineman out of Ravenwood High School in Brentwood, Tennessee, and Alabama's firmly in the mix early in his recruitment. And when you look at this kid physically, it's pretty easy to understand why Alabama wants him. Woodruff, he's listed around 6'5" and 284 pounds. And remember, we're talking about a guy in the 2028 recruiting class. He still has 2 more years of high school seasons to develop, so by the time he actually gets to college, you could be looking at a guy who's added another 20 pounds or so to that frame without sacrificing much athleticism. And that's what makes Woodruff very interesting to me. He already has the size and length that you want, but there's also some versatility there as well. He's the type of prospect that could potentially grow into an interior defensive lineman, or depending on how his body develops, you could have some flexibility where you line him up. And Alabama obviously has made an impression on Woodruff because he considers the Crimson Tide one of the legit contenders in his recruitment. But Alabama certainly isn't alone here. This is already turning into a national recruitment. Schools like Georgia, Ole Miss, Michigan, and Ohio State are among the major programs involved, and Woodruff has more than 20 schools showing interest or offers listed on his recruiting sites. Georgia is one school I would definitely keep an eye on in this situation. The Bulldogs have been heavily involved, and Woodruff has already made multiple trips to Athens. But Alabama's also gotten him on campus as well. Woodruff, he visited Tuscaloosa during the 2025 season, so there's already some familiarity with the program. And that's why these early relationships, they matter in these recruitments. The 2028 signing period is still a long way away. There's going to be recruiting changes, there's going to be new offers, and there's probably going to be several schools that become bigger factors in his recruitment over the next year or two. But Alabama getting involved early gives the Tide an opportunity to build that relationship before Woodruff becomes an even bigger national name. And I think that this recruitment also says something about what Kalen DeBoer and this Alabama staff are trying to build defensively. You can never have enough talented defensive linemen in the SEC. We talk all about the quarterbacks and the receivers and the five-star skill players in recruiting, but if Alabama wants to consistently compete with the programs like Georgia and Texas and other elite programs in this conference, you've got to continue to stack big, athletic kids along the defensive front. And Woodruff, he definitely fits that description. He's 6'5" and around 280 pounds, and he's considered one of the better defensive linemen in the 2028 class, and he plays in a state that Alabama should be always recruiting aggressively. Tennessee, it's not that far from Tuscaloosa, and when an elite defensive lineman comes out of that state, Alabama should be involved. Right now, it looks like that they are. There's obviously a long way to go before Aiden Woodruff makes a college decision, but Alabama has positioned itself as one of the programs to watch. And if Woodruff continues developing physically over the next couple of seasons, this could become a very important recruitment in the 2028 class. I also want to talk about an elite 2028 offensive lineman in the state of Alabama, because when you talk about recruiting at Alabama, there's certain battles that you simply cannot afford to lose. And keeping big-time offensive linemen from the state of Alabama at home, it has to be very high on that list. So that's going to bring us to Samuel Bailey. Bailey, he's one of the top offensive tackles in the 2028 recruiting class, and right now, Alabama appears to be putting itself in really good position early in his recruitment. And when you see Bailey, the first thing that jumps out is obvious. This is a big kid. Bailey, he plays at Mae Jemison High School, which is in Huntsville, Alabama, and he's already listed at about 6'6" and 290 pounds. And once again, this is another 2028 prospect. He's still got 2 more years of high school football before he ever steps foot on a college campus. So he's not just big, but Bailey, he's already established himself as one of the better offensive linemen in the whole country. The Rivals ranking currently has him as a top 50 overall prospect and the number 6 tackle in the country and one of the top players in the state of Alabama. That's exactly the type of player that Alabama and Kalen DeBoer, they need to prioritize. We've talked a lot about Alabama's offensive line over the last couple of years, and if Kalen DeBoer is going to be getting this program where everybody expects it to be, Alabama has to get back to consistently having one of the more physical offensive lines in all of college football. And recruiting players like Bailey is how you get there. What I like about Bailey is that there seems to be more to his game than simply being bigger than everybody else. He's shown impressive athleticism for a player his size, he's got good hand placement, and maybe most importantly for an offensive lineman, there's a little bit of nasty to the way he plays as well, and that's what I want from an offensive lineman. You want offensive linemen who enjoy finishing blocks, and Alabama clearly identified Bailey very early. The Tide, they hosted him early this year in a recruitment visit, and the offensive line coach, Adrian Clem, he's been heavily involved in building that relationship. Alabama eventually offered Bailey, but it was obviously a big deal for an in-state prospect who has been speaking very high of the Crimson Tide. Bailey has previously described Alabama as essentially his hometown team, and he's talked about how much he values the program's culture and, more importantly, player development. And I think that last part is very important because Alabama has something to sell here. If you're an elite offensive lineman from the state of Alabama, you're talking about an opportunity to stay relatively close to home, play some SEC ball, compete for championships, and develop at a program with a long history of putting offensive linemen into the league. So this is certainly not going to be an easy recruitment. Bailey, he already has offers from schools like Auburn, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas A&M, and plenty of others. And considering he's still got 2 more years before signing day, that list is probably only going to grow. So Alabama can't simply rely that this kid's from Huntsville and he's going to be a layup, so to speak. You've got to recruit him, and you've got to recruit him hard. But right now, I like where Alabama stands. The relationship with Adrian Clem, it appears to be growing. Bailey clearly has a lot of respect for Alabama and the program as a whole, and Alabama is already viewed as one of the major players in his recruitment. We talked about how loaded the state of Alabama could be in its 2028 class, and Samuel Bailey, he's just another example of that. He's big, he's athletic, he's physical, and he's one of the best offensive tackles in his class. So there's obviously a very long way to go in his recruitment, but this is exactly the kind of in-state prospect that Alabama needs to keep at home. And if Kalen DeBoer and Adrian Clem can eventually get Sam Bailey in this 2028 class, that would be another major piece toward building the type of offensive line that Alabama is going to need to compete for championships in the future. We're continuing our Alabama player preview series today with a guy I think is becoming one of the more interesting players to watch in fall camp, and that's sophomore linebacker Luke Metz. And Metz, he's very interesting because when Alabama originally recruited him, he wasn't necessarily viewed as one of those big headline names in the 2025 recruiting class. Metz, he played his high school ball at Mill Creek in Georgia, and he committed to Alabama in March of 2024, and he was rated as a 3-star prospect by 24/7 Sports. But this is the type of player that Kane Womack identified pretty early as somebody he wanted on his defense. And now, 2 years later, we're starting to understand why. Let's start at the size. Alabama currently lists Metz at 6'3" and 235 pounds, and that's a really nice frame for an inside linebacker in Kane Womack's defense. He's big enough to play between the tackles and to deal with SEC running backs, but he also has the athletic ability to move around and cover some ground as well. And that's probably the biggest thing that stands out to me about Metz's game. He wants to play fast. He wants to attack. He wants to hit people. Womack basically admitted that Alabama had to get Metz back to playing that way. As we touched on earlier in the show, Metz, he was apparently thinking too much during the spring. He was worried about the scheme. He was worried about making mistakes. And when you're an inside linebacker playing like that, you're probably going to be a day late and a dollar short. So Womack, he challenged him to quit worrying about everything being perfect and get back to what made Alabama recruit him in the first place. See the ball, attack the ball. Basically, go out there and be a heat-seeking missile. According to Womack, that message has clicked because during fall camp, Metz is now playing at a really high level. That's why I think Metz has a legit opportunity to contribute on defense in 2026. Remember, Alabama had a major reset at inside linebacker this past season. And while Caleb Woodson came over from Virginia Tech and gives Alabama an experienced veteran in the middle, there's still an opportunity for someone else to establish himself in that rotation, guys like QB Reese, for example. But Metz, he's putting himself squarely in that conversation. And he's not completely inexperienced either. As a freshman last year, he appeared in all 15 games, mostly on special teams, and finished with 7 tackles. Alabama's coaching staff even named him the Special Teams Player of the Week following the LSU game, and I think there's some value to that. He already knows what it's like to play in an SEC environment. Now it's about taking that next step and becoming someone Alabama trusts defensively. And I don't necessarily think Metz has become an every down starter immediately and has an important role lined up, but if he's one of your top three inside linebackers, he's going to be getting a lot of playing time. Alabama, they can rotate those guys, use different combinations depending on the situation, and Metz, he should continue being valuable on special teams as well. But there's also some upside here as well, because when you look at Metz, he's got everything you want. This guy's 6'3", over 230 pounds, good range, physical, and most importantly, he's apparently starting to play with confidence instead of hesitation. That's the part I'm going to be watching. Because linebacker is one of those positions where you can have all the athletic ability in the world, but if you're thinking instead of reacting, you're going to struggle and fans are going to notice. Metz, he appears to be getting beyond that. And when your defensive coordinator is publicly talking about how well you're playing during the first week of fall camp, that's usually a pretty good sign. So keep an eye on number 4. Luke Metz, he may have not arrived at Alabama as one of the biggest names in his class, but heading into the 2026 season, he has a chance to be one of the young players who earns a bigger role than a lot of people expected. And based on what we're hearing out of fall camp, he might be closer to doing exactly that than we originally thought. So guys, that's going to do it for today's show. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update as we get closer to kickoff in another exciting season of Alabama football. For more Crimson Tide coverage throughout the week, including recruiting news, team updates, and breaking developments, be sure to follow me on X and Instagram at ZAitken7. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate your support, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. I hope you guys all enjoy your weekend, and until next time, roll Tide.